January 1945. The Hurtgen forest shuddered beneath a blanket of ice, its stillness shattered only by the snap of frozen branches and the far-off chatter of automatic fire. German marksmen nested in frost-covered timber peered through optics that clouded in the bitter air. They had thrived on the element of surprise. One round, one casualty, disappearing into the winter fog. Yet across this frozen battlefield, something deeply troubling had started to emerge. From devastated hamlets and shattered hedgerows, American soldiers carried a weapon that did not thunder like an M1 or roar like a Thompson. It murmured, a guttural, mechanical sound that sent chills through men who had spent years believing they controlled the darkness. The M3 submachine gun, quickly nicknamed the grease gun by the troops who wielded it, was never meant for beauty. Stamped steel components, skeletal frame, and a profile so utilitarian it resembled equipment forgotten in a factory corner. But this was no ordinary tool. In trained hands, it became a ghost maker. Firing .45 caliber rounds at close quarters, it gave American infantry fresh authority in the ruined villages of Europe. German commanders had long instructed their men to dismiss American craftsmanship as crude, mass-produced mediocrity. What they hadn't anticipated was a weapon that embraced those very qualities, simplicity, economy, function, and transformed them into lethality. It was inexpensive to manufacture, costing a fraction of the venerable Thompson. It could be produced rapidly with fewer labor hours and less specialized machinery, meaning greater numbers reached the front in record time. The first time German patrols heard its distinctive staccato bark cutting through the night, they mistook it for malfunctioning equipment. But when comrades collapsed at 20 meters, struck by storms of heavy .45 slugs, understanding came swift and cold. The grease gun required no refinement. It needed only to function. Every time, every place, with every soldier. American GIs soon discovered its hidden strength. Unlike the heavier Thompson, the M3's compact design and slower cyclic rate made it manageable, steady even in gloved hands beneath winter skies. In the maze of ruined cities, Aachen, Metz, Bastogne, the grease gun became an extension of the soldier's will. And for the German sniper staring down from a shattered bell tower, it meant something new: fear. For the first time, the night did not belong to them. The origins of the M3 stretched far from the frozen forests of Europe, back to the assembly lines of Detroit and the drawing boards of engineers tasked with solving a critical problem. By early 1942, American commanders recognized that the Thompson, though powerful, was expensive and time-consuming to manufacture. Its finely machined components demanded skilled labor, and every hour spent crafting one meant fewer weapons in the hands of soldiers overseas. The War Department needed something cheaper, faster, and easier to produce without sacrificing lethality. The solution was radical in its simplicity, a weapon built not for polish, but for numbers. General Motors Inland Manufacturing was given the assignment, and what emerged looked nothing like the sleek rifles or ornate sidearms of the past. The M3 was born of stamping presses and welding torches rather than precision lathes. Entire sections of the gun were made from sheet steel, folded and welded into shape. It was utilitarian to the core, a product of America's industrial philosophy. Get the weapon into the hands of every soldier who needed it, and do it immediately. At Aberdeen Proving Ground, it proved its worth. The grease gun's .45 ACP cartridges packed the same punch as the Thompson, but on a lighter frame. Its cyclic rate, just 375 to 400 rounds per minute, was far slower than the Thompson's. Yet that became a strength rather than a weakness. Where the Thompson often climbed in recoil, the M3 could be held steady, its bursts deliberate, its accuracy dependable in the chaos of street fighting. A soldier could squeeze off controlled shots rather than waste precious ammunition in wild sprays. By mid-1943, these guns were being shipped across the Atlantic, tucked into crates marked not with fanfare, but with the cold efficiency of war production. Soldiers at first scoffed at their plain design. They joked that the weapon looked more like an oiling tool than a firearm, its tubular receiver and simple wire stock lending it the appearance of something pulled from a mechanic's bench. The nickname grease gun stuck, but behind the humor was growing respect. In muddy trenches, in bombed farmhouses, in the shadowed corners of shattered streets, the M3 proved itself. German soldiers who once mocked American reliance on mass production now found themselves facing the results of that philosophy heeded. By late 1943, the grease gun was no longer an untested experiment. It had become a trusted companion in the brutal close-quarters battles that defined the European campaign. American armored crews, in particular, praised it. The M3's compact size allowed it to fit inside the cramped interiors of Sherman M4 tanks and M3 half-tracks, where every inch of space mattered. A Thompson could snag on turret hatches or crowd an already packed crew compartment, but the M3 slid easily into weapon racks, ready for use the instant a hatch swung open. Tankers who once fought exposed with M1911 pistols suddenly had a weapon that could deliver heavy firepower at point-blank range. Infantrymen, too, began to see its worth during house-to-house fighting. In Normandy's Bocage country, in the shattered ruins of Saint-Lô, and in the fortified villages of Alsace, the grease gun's controllable bursts proved decisive. A squad clearing a cellar could trust that their pointmen could fire accurately without wasting ammunition or risking jams. German troops accustomed to dominating close encounters with the deadly MP40 discovered that their advantage had eroded against the .45 caliber rounds of the grease gun. Thin walls and hastily thrown-up barricades offered little protection. Even more unnerving to German marksmen was the silence with which it spread fear. Unlike the crack of an M1 Garand, the M3's subdued report seemed to melt into the chaos of battle. A sniper who revealed his position risked a curtain of .45 fire sweeping through windows and lofts, shredding cover and forcing him to abandon his post. Captured Wehrmacht reports began noting this American oilkin weapon as a growing threat in urban engagements. The design was not without flaws. The charging handle, mounted on the side of early models, was prone to breaking in rough use. Soldiers cursed its flimsy dust cover that sometimes failed to stay shut. Yet for all its imperfections, the M3's greatest strength was reliability under fire. Mud, ice, or cold could not easily silence it. American supply chains ensured spare parts and replacements were never far away, reinforcing a truth that gnawed at German commanders. Every weakness in American design was countered by the sheer scale of their industry. What mattered most was that when a soldier squeezed the trigger, the weapon spat heavy slugs until the job was done. The Battle of the Bulge would prove the grease gun's reputation in fire and frost. As German forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes in mid-December, American units found themselves surrounded, cut off, and outnumbered. In the forest surrounding Bastogne, paratroopers of the 101st Airborne dug in, waiting for relief that seemed uncertain. Amid freezing winds and ice-choked foxholes, the M3 became a lifeline. Its slow, deliberate rate of fire allowed paratroopers to conserve ammunition while still laying down bursts that discouraged enemy advances. At ranges where rifles struggled in thick woods, the grease gun spoke with authority. For German marksmen accustomed to terrorizing isolated outposts, the situation had changed. When they revealed their firing nests, American squads no longer relied solely on long rifles to silence them. A grease gun could be leveled at a building facade, and within seconds, timber, plaster, and glass erupted under the weight of 45 slugs. Reports collected from captured Wehrmacht soldiers noted a growing dread of American submachine guns, particularly in night fighting where visibility was poor. One prisoner described the chilling effect of hearing what he called a hacking devil in the darkness. Its rhythm steady, its impact lethal. The logistical advantages of the grease gun also played a decisive role. Because it was cheap and fast to manufacture, vast numbers reached the front lines despite the chaos of late 1944 supply lines. By contrast, German factories already strained by Allied bombing and resource shortages could not match production. Their soldiers carried finely made weapons, but in too few numbers to offset the flood of stamped steel arriving from American assembly lines. In the streets of Bastogne, in icy hamlets where firefights raged room to room, the grease gun earned grim respect. Soldiers recounted that its wire stock could be folded for maneuvering through tight corners, then snapped open in an instant for stability. Each feature seemed designed for the brutal intimacy of European combat, where the distance between hunter and hunted was measured in meters rather than fields. For the Americans who carried it, the grease gun was no longer a stopgap or a budget alternative. It was survival. For the Germans who faced it, it was proof that the arsenal of democracy had found yet another way to tip the balance of battle. Christmas Eve 1944 arrived with no respite. The towering tree, strung with electric lights in Bastogne's center, seemed a defiant gesture against the surrounding darkness. Guards noted that the sound of the M3 had become so familiar that even its absence felt ominous. By the spring of 1945, as American forces pushed deeper into the heart of Germany, the grease gun had secured its place in history. It traveled in the hands of tank crews storming across the Rhine, infantry squads clearing shattered factories in the Ruhr, and paratroopers advancing through towns that smoldered under weeks of artillery fire. Wherever the fight narrowed to alleys, bunkers, and cellars, the M3 became the weapon soldiers reached for instinctively. It was not the weapon of parade grounds or propaganda posters. It was the weapon of mud, brick dust, and smoke-filled stairwells. German records captured in those final months reveal a grudging acknowledgement. Marksmen, once confident in their ability to pin down squads with a single shot, began to note the futility of firing into positions where return bursts from the grease gun could sweep entire window sills or rip through lofts. The weapon did not match the precision of a scoped rifle, but precision was no longer the deciding factor. Firepower that arrived quickly and relentlessly was what turned the tide. A sniper hidden in an attic could delay a patrol for minutes. A grease gun could clear that attic in seconds. What made the M3 remarkable was not perfection, but principle. It represented the industrial might of a nation that believed in equipping every soldier with enough to do the job. Each stamped steel receiver, each folded stock, each heavy magazine was a reminder that victory was forged not just in battles, but in factories manned by ordinary citizens, housewives, farmers, and machinists, many new to their trades, build a tool that tipped the scales of close combat. In its plainness was its genius. When the guns finally fell silent in May, veterans remembered the grease gun with a kind of rough affection. It had rattled in half-tracks, knocked against helmets in crowded troop carriers, and clattered to the floor of bunkers as soldiers reloaded in the dark. Yet it had worked, cheap, reliable, deadly. For the men who carried it, it symbolized the truth that sometimes victory lies not in the elegant or the elaborate, but in the practical and the relentless. For the Germans who faced it, it was the final echo of a war they could no longer win, a reminder that in the shadows of ruined Europe, the night now belonged to someone else. The M3's success was not simply a matter of firepower or availability. It represented a fundamental shift in how America approached warfare. Where European powers had long valued craftsmanship and precision engineering, the United States embraced pragmatism. The grease gun embodied this philosophy at every level, from its crude, stamped components to its no-frills operation. German engineers, trained to create masterpieces like the MP40 with its precision machine bolt and elegant design, struggled to comprehend how such a primitive-looking weapon could prove so effective. Their reports from late 1944 reveal a grudging admission. The Americans had solved problems the Germans didn't realize could be solved differently. The Thompson submachine gun, America's previous standard, had been a product of the old thinking. Each required over 40 hours of skill machining. The receiver alone demanded multiple operations on precision equipment. By contrast, The M3 required fewer than 8 hours of largely unskilled labor. Its receiver was stamped from a single sheet of steel, its barrel required minimal machining, and its bolt was a simple solid block. This efficiency had strategic implications that extended far beyond individual firefights. By early 1945, American factories were producing M3s at a rate that would have been impossible with traditional manufacturing methods. General Motors' inland manufacturing alone was turning out thousands per month, while German production of all submachine guns combined couldn't match those numbers. The weapon's simplicity also meant field maintenance was straightforward. A soldier with basic training could disassemble and clean the M3 in minutes, even in darkness. There were no complex springs to lose, no intricate parts to misalign. If something broke, replacement was simple, and replacements were always available. This availability became its own form of psychological warfare. German soldiers knew that every M3 they destroyed would be replaced within days, sometimes hours. Their own weapons, once lost or damaged, might never be replaced. The mathematics of attrition favored the side that could manufacture faster, and the grease gun was the embodiment of that advantage. American doctrine evolved around this reality. Rather than treating submachine guns as specialized weapons for select troops, commanders began issuing them widely. Tank crews, truck drivers, radio operators, anyone who might face close-quarters combat received an M3. This democratization of firepower transformed infantry tactics across the European theater. The true test of the M3 came in the shattered cities of Germany. As Allied forces penetrated deeper into the Reich, combat shifted from open countryside to dense urban environments where every building could hide defenders, every window could conceal a marksman, and every cellar could become a death trap. In Aachen, the first German city to fall, American infantry discovered that traditional rifles were nearly useless in a maze of rubble-choked streets. Sight lines rarely extended beyond 20 meters. Encounters happened at distances where a soldier barely had time to raise his weapon before the enemy was upon him. Here, the grease gun's advantages became overwhelming. Its compact size allowed soldiers to navigate through collapsed doorways and blown-out windows without snagging on debris. The wire stock could be collapsed when moving through tight spaces, then deployed instantly when contact was made. Most critically, its .45 caliber rounds delivered stopping power that could punch through interior walls and thin masonry, barriers that often stopped rifle rounds or lighter pistol ammunition. Squad tactics evolved to maximize the M3's strengths. Pointmen, traditionally armed with rifles, increasingly carried grease guns. When clearing buildings, teams would designate one soldier with an M3 to enter first, his weapon ready to sweep corners and doorways. Behind him, riflemen provided cover for longer-range threats, but in the critical first seconds of room entry, the grease gun ruled. In Metz, during the brutal October fighting, engineers reported that the M3 was invaluable for clearing fortifications. The city's ancient forts had been modernized by the Germans, creating layered defensive positions that channeled attackers into kill zones. Traditional assault tactics stalled against these positions until soldiers began using grease guns to suppress firing ports while demolition teams moved forward. The weapon's psychological impact in these confined spaces cannot be overstated. The sound of .45 rounds ricocheting through stone corridors created chaos among defenders. Unlike the sharp crack of a rifle, which came from a specific direction, the M3's reports in enclosed spaces seemed to come from everywhere at once. German soldiers described the experience as disorienting, like being trapped inside a steel drum while someone hammered on the outside. Casualty reports from these urban battles reveal a stark pattern. American units equipped with higher ratios of M3s suffered fewer casualties in building clearing operations than those relying primarily on rifles. German soldiers captured during the final months of the war provided revealing testimony about the M3's psychological impact. Wehrmacht interrogation records, declassified decades later, paint a picture of growing unease that bordered on fear. One Gefreiter from the 352nd Volksgrenadier Division, captured near Bastogne in January 1945, described the weapon with unsettling clarity. "We called it the hacking devil. You would hear it in the darkness, not the sharp crack of the Garand that told you where the American was, but this coughing, grinding sound that seemed to move. By the time you located the source, the man next to you was already falling." Another prisoner, a veteran Oberstreiter who had fought since Poland, noted the shift in American tactics. "In 1943, we feared their artillery and their aircraft. By 1944, we feared going into any building where Americans might be waiting. That oil-can weapon of theirs turned every room into a killing box. Our MP-40 was elegant, precise. Theirs was crude, but crude killed just as well, and they had 10 for every one of ours." The reports reveal a pattern. German soldiers consistently noted not just the weapon's lethality, but its ubiquity. Where Wehrmacht submachine guns were issued sparingly to squad leaders and assault troops, Americans seemed to have them everywhere, in tanks, trucks, carried by radio men, even by rear echelon personnel. This abundance created a tactical problem German commanders struggled to solve. Traditional doctrine held that submachine guns were close-range weapons with limited utility in open terrain. German tactics could compensate by keeping engagements at rifle range. But as the war compressed into urban fighting and forest combat, that option vanished. American infantry could force close-range engagements where their firepower advantage became overwhelming. One lieutenant, captured after the Rhine crossing in March, was more philosophical. "We were taught that superior training and discipline would overcome material disadvantages. Perhaps that was true when we outnumbered our enemies. But when every American soldier can fire .45 caliber rounds as fast as he can pump his arm, training becomes less relevant than mathematics. They could afford to miss. We could not." The psychological toll extended beyond individual encounters. German defensive planning increasingly had to account for American close assault capabilities. Positions that might have been held with confidence in earlier years now required additional troops, more ammunition, more preparation, resources Germany no longer possessed. While the M3's reputation was built in infantry combat, its versatility extended far beyond foot soldiers. The weapon found unexpected roles across nearly every branch of the American military, adapted by troops who recognized its potential in situations its designers never anticipated. Tank crews were among the first to embrace it fully. Inside the cramped confines of a Sherman M4, space was premium. The M3's compact design meant it could be stored within easy reach without interfering with the crew's already limited movement. More importantly, when crews had to abandon damaged vehicles under fire, the grease gun provided covering fire that pistols simply couldn't match. At the Battle of the Bulge, multiple tank commanders credited the M3 with saving their crews during emergency bailouts. Combat engineers found the weapon equally valuable. When clearing minefields or demolishing obstacles, engineers were vulnerable to sudden counterattacks. The M3's ability to deliver suppressive fire while slung across the back made it ideal for troops whose hands were occupied with other equipment. During bridge construction operations across the Rhine, engineer units reported that M3-equipped security teams allowed them to work uninterrupted even when German stragglers attempted harassment. Military police units guarding supply depots and prisoner compounds favored the grease gun for a different reason: its intimidation factor. The weapon's distinctive appearance and the reputation it had earned made it a potent deterrent. POW camp commanders noted that the presence of M3 armed guards reduced escape attempts, not through brutality, but through the weapon's psychological weight. Perhaps most surprisingly, artillery-forward observers began carrying M3s when accompanying infantry advances. Traditional doctrine armed these men with carbines, but observers discovered that in close-quarter situations, the grease gun gave them fighting capability that carbines lacked. Several Medal of Honor citations from the European theater mention forward observers using M3s to defend their positions while continuing to call fire missions. Truck drivers and supply convoy personnel also adopted the weapon enthusiastically. The constant threat of ambush on supply routes made the M3's firepower reassuring. Unlike rifles that required both hands and careful aim, drivers could operate the grease gun one-handed if necessary, keeping one hand on the steering wheel while defending their vehicles. Even paratroopers, who traditionally prioritized weight savings above all else, found room for the M3. Its lighter weight compared to the Thompson made it attractive for airborne operations. By war's end, the M3's most significant achievement wasn't measured in enemy casualties or battles won, but in the sheer scale of its production and distribution. American factories had produced nearly 700,000 grease guns between 1943 and 1945, a number that dwarfed German submachine gun production throughout the entire war. This production advantage represented more than mere industrial capacity. It embodied a fundamental difference in how the two nations approach warfare. Germany invested enormous resources in creating sophisticated weapons like the Tiger tank or the MP-44 assault rifle, machines that were undeniably superior in technical specifications. But these masterpieces were produced in limited numbers, their complexity demanding skilled labor and precise materials that became increasingly scarce. America chose a different path. The M3 cost approximately $24 to manufacture, compared to the Thompson's $200 price tag. This 9-tune cost advantage meant that for the resources required to produce one Thompson, factories could turn out nearly 8 grease guns. When multiplied across hundreds of thousands of units, the strategic implications became staggering. General Motors' inland manufacturing's achievement was remarkable not just for volume, but for consistency. Despite using largely unskilled labor and simplified processes, quality control remained high. Weapons produced in early 1943 were still functioning reliably in May 1945. The simplicity that German engineers had mocked proved to be the weapon's greatest strength. Fewer parts meant fewer points of failure. The logistics network supporting the M3 was equally impressive. Ammunition production kept pace with weapon distribution, ensuring that soldiers never lacked .45 ACP rounds. Replacement parts flowed continuously to forward supply depots. Even in the chaos of rapid advances across France and Germany, units could requisition new M3s or repair components within days. This logistical superiority created a cascading effect on German morale. Wehrmacht soldiers increasingly understood that their enemies possessed not just more weapons, but a self-sustaining system that could replace losses faster than they could inflict them. A German infantryman might destroy an American position, only to find it reoccupied hours later with fresh troops carrying fresh weapons. The contrast became starker as 1945 progressed. German factories, hammered by strategic bombing and starved of resources, struggled to maintain even minimal production. American factories, meanwhile, were still accelerating output when the surrender came. In the final accounting, the M3 grease gun proved that wars are won not by the most sophisticated weapons, but by the most effectively deployed ones. The M3's influence extended far beyond World War II's conclusion. Its design philosophy and tactical applications shaped American military thinking for decades, influencing weapon development through Korea, Vietnam, and into the modern era. In Korea, the grease gun saw extensive service during the winter campaigns of 1950-1951. Its reliability in extreme cold, where more complex weapons often failed, made it invaluable to troops fighting around the chosen reservoir. Marines and soldiers discovered that the M3's simple mechanism continued functioning in temperatures that froze the actions of more sophisticated firearms. The weapon's ability to deliver reliable firepower in sub-zero conditions reinforced lessons learned in the Ardennes and Hürtgen Forest. The grease gun's longevity was remarkable. While most World War II weapons were quickly retired and replaced, the M3 remained in American service until 1992, nearly 50 years after its introduction. Tank crews continued carrying them decades after the war because no replacement adequately addressed the same combination of compactness, reliability, and firepower in confined spaces. Military historians have identified several enduring lessons from the M3 program. First, that effectiveness trumps elegance in combat. The weapon that looks impressive in peacetime may prove inferior to the crude tool that simply works when needed. Second, that production capacity is itself a form of combat power. The ability to equip every soldier who needs a weapon matters more than equipping a few with perfect weapons. Third, that simplicity enhances reliability. The M3's lack of complex parts meant it could be maintained by ordinary soldiers with basic training, rather than requiring specialized armors. This principle influenced later designs, from the M16 rifle to modern squad automatic weapons, all of which prioritized ease of maintenance alongside performance. The grease gun also demonstrated the value of tactical flexibility. Its adoption by tank crews, engineers, military police, and other non-infantry personnel showed that weapons designed for one purpose often find unexpected applications when placed in soldiers' hands. Modern military procurement increasingly recognizes this adaptability as a key requirement. Perhaps most significantly, the M3 validated American industrial pragmatism against European craftsmanship traditions. Where pre-war military thinking valued precision manufacturing and artisanal quality, the grease gun proved that stamped steel and welded seams could defeat machine perfection, provided they were produced in sufficient quantity. This lesson resonated throughout the Cold War, as American defense strategy consistently prioritized volume and replaceability over individual unit superiority. In the end, the M3 grease gun story is not merely about a weapon, but about the philosophy that created it and the nation it represented. When German marksmen first heard its distinctive report echoing through the frozen timber of Hurtgen Forest in January 1945, they were hearing more than gunfire. They were hearing the sound of their defeat. The grease gun embodied everything the Third Reich had failed to understand about modern industrial warfare. Nazi ideology celebrated the craftsman, the artisan, the perfect machine built by superior hands. America countered with the assembly line, the stamp part, the weapon built not once by a master, but 1,000,000 times by ordinary workers. Where Germany sought perfection, America sought sufficiency at scale. History rendered its verdict on which approach prevailed. For the soldiers who carried the M3 through the ruins of Aachen and Metz, across the Rhine, and into the heart of Germany, the weapon was never about specifications or engineering philosophy. It was about survival. It was about the confidence that when they kicked down a door or cleared a cellar, they had the firepower to prevail. That confidence, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, translated into momentum that German forces could not stop. The German soldiers who faced it understood this reality better than their commanders. The Wehrmacht prisoner who called it the hacking devil was acknowledging not just the weapon's lethality, but the futility of resisting an enemy who could replace every loss, who could equip every soldier, who could sustain combat indefinitely. The mathematical certainty of defeat. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the M3 had proven that wars are won not by those who build the most impressive weapons, but by those who most effectively translate industrial capacity into combat power. The grease gun was never beautiful, never elegant, never celebrated in propaganda. It was simply there, everywhere, reliable, deadly, and ultimately victorious. For German marksmen who had once ruled the night through patience and precision, the M3 represented a harsh lesson. That darkness offers no advantage against an enemy who brings overwhelming firepower to every encounter. The night no longer belonged to the sniper waiting for a single perfect shot. It belonged to the soldier with 30 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition and the will to use them. In museums today, the M3 sits beside more glamorous weapons. The Garand that Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised, the Thompson with its gangster mystique. But those who understand warfare recognize the grease gun's true significance. It was the weapon that proved American industrial democracy could outfight totalitarian perfectionism, one stamped steel receiver at a time.